tonight I'm going to be walking us through the Boston Massacre. In my opinion, one of the more important early incidents within the early days of our revolution and the colonies and helping unite the colonies. It was a contributing factor, in my opinion, in uniting us against the crown. The Boston Massacre, like its name, most people have heard of it, occurred in Boston on March 5th, 1770. And Boston, Robert Middlecoff in the book Glorious Cause explains this very well. Boston was a place that was not very pro-British, not very pro the crown and loyalty. Boston, as he describes, actually had kind of an animalistic energy to the city. It was really rough around the edges. And a lot of that could be contributed to they were very much against the taxation given by the crown. They were against the occupation by redcoats, British military. And actually, Middlecoff mentions that British soldiers were allowed to have civilian jobs while living in Boston, while stationed in Boston. And of course, if you're a Bostonian there fighting for a job, trying to feed your family, and British soldiers come in and take your job, that's gonna create some hostility, because the Boston Massacre is centered purely around hostility. So what happens? And it's still, the massacre itself is a little murky. It's one of those things in history that's not 100% clear. But as the story goes, and as history tells us, a riot broke out in the streets on the night of March 5th, 1770. And Captain Preston, he was of the 29th Regiment Redcoats, brought in 8 of his men to help quell the riot, maintain order, and settle these people down. But what actually happened was 5 people ended up getting shot. Okay, the British Redcoats, as history tells us, were provoked. Captain Prescott gave no such order to fire, but his men fired, killing 5 people. And now there was blood, Bostonian blood, running in the streets. And the city itself, the people of Boston, were calling for Preston and his men to be hanging from the end of a noose. And what happened was Preston and the 8 of his redcoats were sent to trial. Oddly enough, they were defended by our very own John Adams, who very much wanted to maintain justice, as well as, he ends up being one of the founding fathers of our country later on. But according to the article on the massacre I found from the African American experience, the trial was kind of new and unprecedented in that African Americans were used and brought in and questioned, and they had an interesting story to tell, in that people within the riot and the crowd were provoking the British soldiers, telling them to fire maliciously. And that was a contributing factor in the Redcoats opening fire. Preston gave no such order. And the jury decided that Preston and his men should be acquitted in the fact that they were provoked. And the Boston Massacre, the name Massacre was created. Not taking away from the deaths. The killing of 5 people is terrible, no matter when, where, or how. But there was a picture printed by an artist named Henry Pilham, and the print was distributed by the Sons of Liberty. So we get to see the early seeds of propaganda. And this picture was distributed throughout the colonies, especially throughout Boston. And it was called the Bloody Massacre. And it really provoked in the hearts of people, not only in Boston, but in the United States, for animosity towards the crown and against any loyalist views that they might have had. I'm also getting a lot of this material from the website The Freedom Trail. The Freedom Trail today in Boston is a network of tours. It's about 2.5 miles worth of tours. And you can actually go see the site relatively within a few yards of where the Boston Massacre took place. This, in my opinion, is unprecedented, that you can go stand in the relative area where our country was, the spark was lit, the powder keg was ignited, that one of the reasons that brought us to our independence. And while it is simply just basically little piece of art sunk into the pavement, a memorial sunk into the pavement. It's not a building, it's not a fort, it's not a giant memorial. It is still, I think, very much worth people's time to go there, to take the tour, and to see the area of one of the many incidents where our country was pushed towards independence.